Story 1. The Hitchhiker Who Knew Too Much. Leonard Matthews had been driving long-haul routes for 33 years, and he'd learned early on never to pick up hitchhikers. It was company policy, insurance liability, and just common sense in an era when you never knew who you might be inviting into your cab. But on a freezing January night in 2023, somewhere along Highway 50 in Nevada, the so-called loneliest road in America, Leonard broke that rule, and it cost him everything he thought he understood about reality. Leonard was hauling a load of industrial machinery from Sacramento to Salt Lake City, a route that took him across the desolate stretch of Nevada desert where civilization thinned to almost nothing. Towns were separated by 60, 70, sometimes 80 miles of empty highway. Gas stations were rare. Other vehicles were rarer still. It was the kind of road where breaking down could mean waiting hours for help, where the darkness was so complete that your headlights seemed to carve a tunnel through solid black rather than illuminating any landscape. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, unusual even for a Nevada winter. Leonard's breath fogged the windows despite the heater running full blast. He'd been driving for 6 hours straight, his eyes aching from staring at the endless white line disappearing beneath his wheels when he saw the figure standing on the shoulder. At first, Leonard thought it was a trick of the light or fatigue playing games with his perception. But as he drew closer, the figure resolved into undeniable reality. A man in a thin jacket and jeans, thumb extended in the universal gesture of hitchhiking, standing in 15-degree weather at 3 in the morning in the middle of nowhere. Leonard's instinct was to drive past. Every safety regulation and personal rule screamed at him to keep going. But something made him brake, made him pull onto the shoulder 50 feet past the hitchhiker. Maybe it was the temperature, the certainty that anyone left out here would freeze to death before dawn. Maybe it was loneliness after hours of empty highway. Maybe it was something else, some unconscious recognition that this moment was inevitable. In his mirror, Leonard watched the figure walk toward his truck with measured, unhurried steps. The man was middle-aged, maybe 50, with weathered features and dark eyes that caught the red glow of Leonard's taillights. He carried no bag, no supplies, nothing that suggested he'd been traveling. Leonard rolled down his window as the man approached. "You all right?" "It's freezing out here." "I'm fine," the man said, his voice calm and oddly accentless. "But I could use a ride going east. I can take you as far as Ely. That work?" "That works perfectly." The man climbed into the passenger seat with an ease that suggested familiarity with truck cabs. He didn't shiver despite coming in from the freezing air. He didn't make small talk or offer thanks. He simply settled into the seat, fastened his seatbelt, and stared forward through the windshield. Leonard pulled back onto the highway, trying to ignore the growing unease in his gut. "I'm Leonard. What's your name?" "You can call me Thomas." "What were you doing out there, Thomas? Car breakdown?" "No, I was waiting." "Waiting for what? A ride?" "Waiting for you." Leonard's hands tightened on the wheel. "What do you mean, waiting for me?" Thomas turned to look at him for the first time, and Leonard saw that his eyes weren't quite right. They were too dark, the pupils dilated too wide, or maybe there were no pupils at all, just uniform darkness. "I've been waiting on this highway for Leonard Matthews, age 56. Driving a Peterbilt hauling industrial machinery to pass by at 3:17 a.m. on January 19th, 2023. And here you are, right on schedule." Ice water flooded Leonard's veins. "How do you know my name? How do you know what I'm hauling?" "I know everything about you, Leonard. I know you left Sacramento at 6 p.m. yesterday. I know you stopped for fuel in Reno and had coffee and a sandwich that didn't sit well. I know you're divorced twice, have 3 children who barely speak to you, and you've been thinking about retirement but can't afford it. I know that in 47 miles you're going to see something on this highway that will change everything." Leonard's foot moved toward the brake, his mind screaming at him to stop the truck and throw this man out. But his body wouldn't obey. His foot stayed steady on the accelerator, maintaining exactly 65 miles per hour. "What are you?" Leonard managed to ask through clenched teeth. "I'm an observer, a recorder. I stand at certain points along certain roads and I wait for specific moments, specific people. When they arrive, I bear witness to what happens next." "What happens next?" "In 46 miles, you're going to see a vehicle coming toward you in your lane. A red pickup truck, driver drunk, crossed the center line. You're going to have a choice. Swerve left into the oncoming lane where there might be other vehicles, swerve right onto the shoulder where the ground drops away steeply, or hold your course and hit the truck head-on." Leonard felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "And this is insane. You're insane." "In the original timeline, the one that was supposed to happen, you swerved left. There was another car there, a family of 4. Your truck hit them. Everyone died. You, the drunk driver, the family, 7 deaths total. The highway was closed for 16 hours. 3 of your children came to your funeral. 2 of them spoke. They said you were a stranger to them." "Stop it," Leonard whispered. "But I'm here now, which means something changed. Someone changed it. Sent me back to this moment, to this point, to give you information you weren't supposed to have. So now you have a choice you didn't have before. You can make a different decision." "Why? Why would anyone change it?" Thomas smiled, and the expression was wrong, too wide, revealing too many teeth. "That's not for you to know. I'm just here to observe what you do with the information. 43 miles now." Leonard tried again to stop the truck, to pull over, to do anything other than continue driving toward whatever horrific moment waited ahead. But his body remained locked in position, hands on the wheel, foot on the accelerator, following the highway east through the darkness. "This can't be real," Leonard said. "You're not real. I'm hallucinating, fatigue, carbon monoxide, something. Test that hypothesis. Try to touch me." Leonard reached out with his right hand, keeping his left on the wheel. His fingers passed through Thomas's shoulder as if through smoke. The hitchhiker remained visible, solid-looking, but had no physical substance. "You're a projection," Thomas explained, "sent back through time to this specific moment. I'm not really here. I'm being transmitted from a point several years in your future when the technology to do this was developed. Someone in that future decided this moment was important enough to intervene in." "Who? Who decided?" "You did, Leonard. A version of you that survived the crash, that lived with the guilt of killing that family for 6 years before the time technology became available. That Leonard spent everything he had to send me back to give you this warning." Leonard felt tears streaming down his face. "I don't want to die. I don't want to kill anyone." "Then don't. You have 40 miles to think about what you'll do. Swerve left and risk hitting another vehicle. Swerve right and risk rolling down the embankment. Or hold your course and accept the head-on collision. Each choice has consequences. Each choice creates a different future. What did I choose? The future version of me. What did he want me to do?" "He didn't say. He couldn't. Telling you what to choose would be the same as choosing for you, and apparently that's not allowed. I'm only authorized to provide information, not guidance. The choice has to be yours." They drove in silence for several miles. Leonard's mind raced through scenarios, calculating angles and speeds and outcomes. If he swerved left and there was no other vehicle, he'd be fine. But Thomas had mentioned a family. Were they there in every timeline? Or only in the original? If he swerved right, would the shoulder hold or would he roll? How steep was the embankment? And if he held his course, hit the drunk driver head-on, would it really kill him? His truck was larger, heavier. Maybe he'd survive. Maybe only the drunk would die. 35 miles, Thomas announced. Tell me about the family, Leonard said. The one in the other car. Who were they? Parents in their 40s, 2 children ages 7 and 9, coming back from a vacation in Lake Tahoe. The father was a teacher, the mother was a nurse. The children were good students, well-liked. In the timeline where you hit them, over 300 people attended their funeral. And if I don't swerve left, if I make a different choice, then they live, they make it home safely. The children grow up, go to college, have families of their own. The timeline branches, consequences cascade forward in ways I can't fully map. What about the drunk driver? He's already dead in every scenario, that's fixed. His trajectory has been set for years by choices he made. But you're a variable. Your decision creates ripples. 20 miles, 15, 10. Leonard's hands ached from gripping the wheel. His vision had narrowed to the tunnel of his headlights, the white line dividing the lanes, the darkness pressing in from all sides. 5 miles, Thomas said. You should see his headlights soon. He's coming around a curve. He doesn't know he's crossed the center line. He won't realize it until it's too late. And there they were. Headlights in the distance, growing brighter, wrong somehow. Positioned where no headlights should be. He's in your lane, Thomas confirmed unnecessarily. Leonard's mind went blank, pure instinct taking over. The headlights grew larger, closer, and time seemed to slow down. He could see the truck now, red, older model, weaving slightly. He could make decisions again, his paralysis suddenly lifted. Control returned to him at the exact moment he needed it most. His hands twitched on the wheel. Left would take him into the oncoming lane. Right would send him onto the shoulder. Straight ahead meant collision. The drunk driver's truck was 100 yards away. 75, 50. Leonard thought about his children, about dying without ever really knowing them. He thought about the family in the other car, about the 300 mourners at their funeral. He thought about the future version of himself who had sent this warning, who had lived with guilt for 6 years, 25 yards. Leonard made his choice. He jerked the wheel right, hard, sending his truck onto the shoulder. The ground was rough, the truck bouncing violently. The shoulder was wider than he'd expected, and for a moment Leonard thought he might make it. Then the right wheels hit soft sand, and the truck tilted. Everything became chaos, the world spinning, metal screaming, glass shattering. The truck rolled once, twice, came to rest on its side. Leonard hung from his seatbelt, dazed, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. But alive. Through the shattered windshield, he watched the red pickup truck continue down the highway, still in the wrong lane, completely unaware of what had almost happened. A moment later, a sedan passed in the correct lane, also oblivious. A family, perhaps. The family. Thomas sat beside Leonard, unaffected by the crash, still staring forward. Interesting choice, he said. Not the one original Leonard expected, I think, but a choice, nonetheless. Am I going to die here? Leonard asked through bloody teeth. No. Help will arrive in 14 minutes. You'll survive with minor injuries. Your cargo will be damaged, your truck totaled, but you'll live. Thomas finally turned to look at him. The question is what you'll do with that life now. What do you mean? You chose to save yourself and the family, but at great cost. You'll be out of work for months while you recover. Your company will fight the insurance claim. You'll go into debt. Your children still won't call. In 6 years, you won't have the money to send me back to warn you, so this timeline, the one you just created, won't include that future version of yourself. He's been erased, replaced by a different Leonard, one who makes different choices going forward. I don't understand. You will? In time, you'll understand that every choice creates a new branch, a new future, and sometimes those futures reach back to change the past, which changes the future, which reaches back again. It's a loop, Leonard. An infinite loop of decisions and consequences, and you're caught in it now, aware of it in a way most people never are. Thomas began to fade, becoming translucent. My time is up. The moment has passed. I'm being recalled to whenever I came from, except that wherever is gone now, erased by your choice. Strange, isn't it? I was sent back to change things, and in changing them, I've made it impossible for me to have been sent back at all. Paradox. We never quite worked out how to avoid those. Wait, Leonard said, but Thomas was gone, vanished as completely as if he'd never been there. Leonard hung in his seatbelt, bleeding, listening to the distant sound of sirens approaching, and wondered if any of it had been real. Had there really been a hitchhiker? Had he really been told about the future? Or had he simply seen the drunk driver coming and made an instinctive choice to avoid collision? He'd never know for certain. But in the years that followed, after he recovered and went back to driving, after he took a different job with a different company, after he slowly rebuilt his life and eventually reconnected with his children, Leonard would sometimes see hitchhikers standing on lonely highways at night. And he never stopped to pick them up, because he understood now that some hitchhikers weren't looking for rides. They were looking for moments, for decision points, for the places where timelines branched and futures unfolded. They were observers sent back from tomorrow to witness yesterday, caught in loops of causation that defied simple understanding. Leonard Matthews drove trucks for another 12 years before finally retiring. He never encountered Thomas again, never received another warning from the future, but he drove differently after that night, more carefully, more aware that every decision behind the wheel rippled forward in ways he couldn't predict. And sometimes, late at night on empty highways, Leonard wondered about all the other timelines, all the other versions of himself making different choices. Was there a Leonard who swerved left and killed the family? Was there a Leonard who held his course and died in the collision? Were they all real, all existing simultaneously in parallel universes, all unaware of each other except for moments like this when the barriers between timelines grew thin enough for messages to pass through? The questions haunted him, but he learned to live with uncertainty. He learned that the burden of knowledge, of knowing that your choices rippled forward and backward through time, was heavier than the burden of ignorance. And he learned never to pick up hitchhikers because you never knew which ones were real and which ones were echoes from futures that might never exist, sent back to change moments that had already passed, caught in infinite loops of cause and effect that defied everything Leonard had ever believed about the linear nature of time. The hitchhiker who knew too much had taught Leonard that the past wasn't fixed and the future wasn't certain, and that sometimes the most terrifying thing about driving America's highways wasn't what you might encounter on the road ahead, but what might be reaching back from tomorrow to change the decisions you made today. Story 2. The Convoy of the Dead. Sarah Brennan had been driving trucks for 18 years, specializing in overnight hauls when the highways were empty and the driving was peaceful. At 42, she'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. Pick up loads in the evening, drive through the night, deliver at dawn, sleep through the day. It suited her personality and her life. Sarah liked the solitude, the darkness, the sense of being alone with her thoughts and the road. In March of 2023, Sarah accepted a run from Atlanta to Nashville, a simple 5-hour drive along Interstate 24 through the mountains of northern Georgia and southern Tennessee. She'd driven the route hundreds of times, knew every grade and curve, every truck stop and rest area. It was easy money, the kind of job that required minimal effort and maximum attention to road conditions. Sarah left Atlanta just after midnight, her trailer loaded with restaurant equipment. The night was clear, temperature mild, traffic light, perfect conditions. She settled into the driver's seat, adjusted her mirrors, tuned her CB radio to channel 19 for traffic updates, and pulled onto the interstate. The first hour passed normally. Sarah made good time through the Atlanta suburbs and into the mountains, her truck climbing the grades with steady power. She passed a few other vehicles, cars heading home from late shifts, a couple of other trucks making their own overnight runs. The CB chattered occasionally with brief exchanges between drivers, nothing unusual. Around 1:30 in the morning, as Sarah crested a particularly steep grade, she noticed headlights in her mirrors. Another truck coming up behind her fast, too fast for the grade and the load it must be carrying. Sarah frowned and kept her speed steady, expecting the truck to slow down as it caught up to her. It didn't. The truck pulled into the passing lane and roared past, doing at least 80 miles per hour. Sarah caught a glimpse of it as it passed. An older model semi, maybe from the 90s, with faded paint and no company markings. The trailer was a standard dry van, unmarked, anonymous. What disturbed Sarah was the driver. She couldn't see clearly through the other truck's windows, but what she did see didn't look right. The figure behind the wheel sat too still, too rigid, with a posture that seemed wrong for someone driving at such high speed. The truck pulled ahead and disappeared around a curve. Sarah shook her head and returned her attention to the road, attributing the odd sighting to shadows and distance. 5 minutes later, another truck passed her the same way, same high speed, same older model vehicle, same unmarked trailer. And again the driver sat with that same rigid, wrong posture. Then another truck, and another. Within 15 minutes, 6 trucks had blown past Sarah at dangerous speeds, all identical in their strangeness. Old vehicles, no markings, drivers who sat too still. Sarah grabbed her CB handset. Breaker, this is Night Runner heading northwest on 24. Anyone else seeing these trucks flying past? They're doing at least 80, maybe more. Static answered her. She tried again on different channels, but got the same white noise response. That was odd. There should have been at least a few drivers monitoring the standard channels. The 7th truck that passed her was different. This one slowed down as it pulled alongside, matching her speed exactly. Sarah looked over and felt her heart skip a beat. The driver was looking directly at her, but the driver wasn't human. The face that stared at Sarah from the other truck's window was gray and withered, flesh stretched tight over skull, eyes sunken into deep sockets. It looked like a corpse, dead for weeks, somehow propped behind the wheel and driving. Sarah's hands jerked on the wheel, nearly sending her truck onto the shoulder. The dead-faced driver continued staring at her for another moment. Then the truck accelerated and pulled ahead, disappearing into the darkness. Sarah's breath came in short gasps. Her rational mind tried to explain what she'd seen. A mask, a Halloween prank, her own tired eyes playing tricks. But she knew what she'd seen. That face had been real, the decay unmistakable. Her CB radio crackled to life. A voice emerged from the static, rasping, hollow, wrong. Join the convoy, Sarah Brennan, we've been waiting for you. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The voice knew her name. Who is this? She demanded into her handset. We're the drivers who never finished their routes. We're the ones who died behind the wheel, who crashed or had heart attacks or fell asleep and didn't wake up. We're the dead convoy, and we drive these highways forever, making deliveries that never arrive, following routes that never end. This isn't funny. Identify yourself. Look ahead, Sarah. We're all here. Sarah looked through her windshield and felt her mind rebel against what she saw. The highway ahead was filled with trucks, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretched out in a line that disappeared into the distance. All old models, all unmarked, all driving at excessive speeds. And as Sarah watched, they began to slow down, the entire convoy decelerating in perfect synchronization until they matched her speed. Sarah was suddenly driving in formation with an army of trucks surrounded on all sides, boxed in. The CB voice continued. Everyone in this convoy died driving. Some fast, crashes, fires, heart attacks, some slow, carbon monoxide poisoning, undiagnosed medical conditions, exposure. But all of us died in our trucks and our spirits couldn't let go. So we drive forever, making runs that never complete, hauling loads that vanish at dawn, following highways that exist between life and death. Let me go, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I'm not dead. I don't belong here. Not yet, but you will be. In 17 miles, there's a curve. Your brakes are going to fail. You'll go over the edge. The fall will kill you. We've been waiting to add you to the convoy. Sarah immediately tested her brakes, tapping the pedal. They responded normally. But her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the wheel steady. The trucks around her maintained their formation, boxing her in. She couldn't slow down without being rear-ended by the truck behind her. She couldn't speed up without hitting the truck ahead. She was trapped in the convoy, being carried forward toward whatever fate awaited at that curve 17 miles ahead. Sarah tried her phone, but it showed no signal. She tried her emergency beacon, but nothing happened when she pressed it. She tried her horn, but no sound emerged. The dead convoy had isolated her, cut her off from any help or contact with the living world. Why me? Sarah asked into the CB. Why am I supposed to die tonight? Everyone dies, Sarah. Your time is simply scheduled for tonight, this highway, that curve. We're not causing your death, we're just here to witness it, to welcome you into the convoy afterward. No, I won't accept that. I'll stop. I'll pull over before the curve. You can try. Sarah did try. She hit her brakes hard, trying to force her way out of the formation. But the trucks around her adjusted their speeds to match, maintaining the box. When she tried to swerve into another lane, trucks appeared to block her path. When she tried to force her way onto the shoulder, the truck beside her drifted over, preventing her from leaving the highway. The dead convoy had her trapped, carrying her inexorably toward the curve, where her brakes would fail and her truck would go over the edge. 15 miles, 14, 13. Sarah's mind raced, trying to think of any way to escape. If her brakes were going to fail, what could cause that? A leak in the brake line? A malfunction in the air system? She tried to remember her pre-trip inspection, tried to recall if she'd noticed anything unusual. But everything had checked out perfectly. Her truck was in excellent condition. Unless the dead convoy could influence mechanical systems, unless they could reach across from their half-dead state and cause failures in the living world. 10 miles. 9. 8. Why warn me at all? Sarah asked into the CB. If my death is inevitable, why tell me about it? Because watching you try to escape is the only entertainment we have. We're trapped in this convoy, making the same runs over and over for eternity. Your fear, your desperation, your futile attempts to avoid your fate, they're the only things that break the monotony. The voice was speaking truth, Sarah realized with horror. The dead convoy wasn't trying to kill her. They were already going to die naturally. They were just here to watch, to feed off her terror, to enjoy the show. 7 miles. 6. 5. Sarah made a decision born of rage rather than reason. If the convoy wanted a show, she'd give them one. She grabbed her CB handset and shouted, "You want entertainment? Then watch this." She cut her wheel hard right, aiming directly for the truck beside her. The impact was tremendous. Metal screamed. Her truck shuddered violently. But she'd caught the dead truck at an angle that sent it spinning away. The gap in the convoy formation opened. Sarah punched through, her truck lurching onto the shoulder and then beyond into the grass and dirt beside the highway. She bounced over rough ground, her trailer fishtailing dangerously behind her. but she was out of the convoy, free from their formation. The dead trucks didn't follow onto the shoulder. They continued on the highway, maintaining their speed, and within moments, Sarah had pulled ahead of them, 4 miles to the curve. Sarah's brake pedal felt spongy now, less responsive. The dead convoy had been telling the truth. Her brakes were failing, the system losing pressure. Sarah pumped the pedal, trying to build pressure, but it continued to degrade. 3 miles. She downshifted, using her engine to help slow the truck. The transmission whined in protest, but the truck decelerated. Not enough, though. She was still going too fast. 2 miles. Sarah spotted something ahead, an emergency runaway truck ramp, the kind built into steep mountain grades to catch trucks whose brakes had failed. She'd never had to use one before, but she knew how they worked. A long uphill stretch of gravel and sand designed to dissipate a truck's momentum through friction. 1 mile. The curve appeared ahead, and Sarah could see why it was so dangerous. The highway bent sharply, right while descending a steep grade. The guardrail looked flimsy, barely adequate. Beyond it was darkness, a drop-off into a valley, 1/2 mile. The runaway ramp was just before the curve. Sarah aimed for it, praying she had enough control left to make the turn. Her trailer swayed dangerously as she left the highway, nearly jackknifing, but Sarah corrected and kept the truck pointing up the ramp. The gravel grabbed at her wheels, slowing the truck dramatically. Sand and rock flew everywhere, the noise tremendous. Sarah held the wheel steady as her truck climbed the ramp, momentum bleeding away until finally 200 feet up the incline, the truck groaned to a complete stop. Sarah sat there gasping, her entire body shaking. She'd survived. She'd escaped the dead convoy and avoided the curve where she was supposed to die. But as she sat there in the darkness, her headlights illuminating the gravel ahead, Sarah heard them. Engines. Lots of engines, growing closer. She looked in her mirrors and saw the convoy pulling off the highway, their trucks climbing the runaway ramp toward her position. Dozens of them, headlights creating a wall of light, engines growling with something that wasn't mechanical. The CB crackled. Clever, Sarah. You avoided the curve. But that doesn't mean you've avoided death. It just means we have to work a little harder. The lead truck in the convoy smashed into Sarah's rear bumper, pushing her forward. Her engine was off, her brakes useless, and the dead trucks were shoving her back down the ramp toward the highway, toward the curve, toward the drop-off that waited beyond. Sarah tried to restart her engine, but the key wouldn't turn. The dead convoy had somehow disabled her electrical system. She was helpless, trapped in a dead truck being pushed by dead drivers toward her death. The convoy shoved her onto the highway, building speed. The curve approached rapidly. Sarah grabbed her CB one last time. Help! Someone help me! I'm on Interstate 24, northbound. Someone please? A voice answered. Not the dead convoy's rasping tones, but a human voice, male, confused. This is Hammer heading south on 24. I think I see you. What the hell? Lady, there's no one pushing your truck. Sarah looked in her mirrors. To the other driver, the dead convoy was invisible. He saw only Sarah's truck rolling toward the curve with no apparent cause. My brakes failed, Sarah shouted into the CB. I can't stop. Jesus, okay, I'm calling 911. Sarah never heard the rest. Her truck hit the curve at 60 miles per hour, far too fast to make the turn. The guardrail shattered like tissue paper, and Sarah felt the sickening sensation of weightlessness as her truck went airborne. Time seemed to stop during the fall. Sarah saw stars above, darkness below, felt the truck rotating slowly in the air. She thought about her family, about all the runs she'd never complete, about dying alone in the darkness between mountains. The impact was absolute. Her truck hit the valley floor and exploded, diesel fuel igniting in a fireball that lit up the night. The trucker who witnessed the accident, Timothy Hammond, heading home to Chattanooga, pulled over and called it in. He told the police he'd seen the truck rolling toward the curve with no apparent cause, that it looked like a brake failure. The investigators agreed. They found evidence of a catastrophic brake system failure, cause unknown. No one believed Timothy when he mentioned seeing dozens of other trucks on the highway just before the accident, trucks that disappeared the moment Sarah's vehicle went over the edge. The police attributed it to trauma and confusion. But Timothy knew what he'd seen. And in the months that followed, as he continued driving Interstate 24 on his regular routes, he sometimes saw them. The dead convoy. Dozens of trucks from different eras, all unmarked, all driving faster than they should, all carrying drivers who sat too still. And leading them now, driving at the head of the convoy, was a newer truck, Sarah Brennan's truck, restored and whole, with Sarah herself behind the wheel, her face gray and withered, her eyes sunken but still aware. She'd joined the convoy after all. Death had claimed her at that curve despite her attempts to escape, and now she drove the same route over and over, making runs that never completed, part of an eternal procession of the dead who couldn't let go of the road. Timothy never drove at night anymore. He switched to day shifts, took different routes, did everything he could to avoid Interstate 24 after dark. But sometimes he still heard them on his CB radio, voices of dead drivers, rasping and hollow, discussing routes and loads and destinations they'd never reach. And sometimes, on the edge of hearing, he thought he recognized Sarah's voice among them, welcoming new drivers to the convoy, warning them about curves ahead where their brakes would fail, feeding off their terror as they realized they were about to join the eternal procession of truckers who died behind the wheel and couldn't stop driving. The dead convoy is still out there, Timothy knows. Still recruiting new members. Still driving America's highways in the hours between midnight and dawn, when the barriers between life and death grow thin and the road belongs to those who can never leave it. He wonders how many trucks he passes during his day shifts are actually part of the convoy, visible only at night. He wonders how many drivers have died on lonely highways and joined that eternal formation. He wonders if someday his own brakes will fail on a curve and he'll find himself driving with Sarah and the others, trapped forever in the convoy of the dead. The thought keeps him alert during every shift, checking his brakes obsessively, avoiding curves, staying vigilant. Because Timothy Hammond learned that death doesn't always wait for old age or illness. Sometimes it waits at specific curves on specific highways, with a convoy of dead drivers ready to welcome you into their ranks. And once you join the dead convoy, you drive forever, making deliveries that vanish at dawn, following routes that never end, trapped between life and death on highways that stretch into eternity. Story 3. The Load That Whispered. Marcus DeLuca had been hauling specialized cargo for 25 years, everything from art pieces to scientific equipment, from pharmaceutical samples to classified government materials. At 51, he had the security clearances and reputation necessary to handle sensitive loads without asking uncomfortable questions. He picked up cargo, delivered it to specified locations, collected his premium pay, and never discussed the details with anyone. In April of 2023, Marcus accepted a job that would teach him why some questions should always be asked, regardless of the pay. The pickup location was a nondescript warehouse outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. The paperwork described the cargo as biological research materials requiring climate control and isolation protocols. Marcus had hauled similar loads before, usually lab animals, tissue samples, or experimental materials that needed careful handling. The warehouse staff loaded a single container into his refrigerated trailer, a black metal box approximately 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet tall, with heavy locks and a digital temperature display showing exactly 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The box had no labels, no hazard warnings, just a serial number stenciled in white paint. Keep it at exactly 32 degrees, the loading supervisor told Marcus. Not 31, not 33, exactly 32. If the temperature deviates more than 1 degree in either direction, call this number immediately. He handed Marcus a card with a phone number and nothing else. What's in the box? Marcus asked. Above your clearance level. Just maintain the temperature and deliver to Denver by tomorrow morning. Marcus secured the container properly, verified the temperature settings, and started his engine. Denver was an 8-hour drive, straightforward route, nothing complicated. He'd be there by dawn. The first hour was normal. Marcus drove north through New Mexico, the container sitting silent and stable in his trailer. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily, maintaining its precise 32 degrees. Traffic was light, weather was clear, everything routine. Then Marcus heard the first whisper. It was so faint he almost missed it. A sound that might have been wind or might have been something else, carried through his truck's internal speakers along with the CB static. Marcus turned down the radio and listened. There it was again. Not wind, not static. A voice speaking words he couldn't quite make out, coming from the direction of his trailer. Marcus checked his mirrors. The trailer looked normal, the refrigeration unit running properly. The temperature display still showing exactly 32 degrees. But the whispering continued, growing gradually louder, resolving into something that might have been words in a language Marcus didn't recognize. He tried his CB radio, thinking maybe he was picking up a stray transmission. But all channels were silent except for that whispering, which now seemed to be coming from every speaker in his cab, CB, stereo, even his phone when he checked it. The whispering grew louder still, and Marcus began to distinguish patterns in it. Not one voice, but multiple voices, dozens maybe, all speaking in that strange language, all emanating from the container in his trailer. Marcus grabbed the card with the emergency number and called it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. A voice answered, professional, emotionless. Report. This is Marcus DeLuca, driver 447. I'm hearing sounds. From the cargo, voices, I think. The temperature is stable at 32, but something's wrong. A long pause. The cargo is undamaged? I don't know. I haven't opened it, I'm just hearing these voices. Do not open the container under any circumstances. The voices are expected. Continue to your destination. Do not stop except for fuel. Do not sleep. Do not allow anyone else near the trailer. Is that understood? What the hell am I carrying? Above your clearance level, follow your instructions. The line disconnected. Marcus sat there, his hands shaking, the whispering voices growing louder in his cab. They were speaking English now, or at least some of them were, their words overlapping but occasionally distinct. So cold, why is it so cold? Can't remember my name, can't remember. Let us out, please let us out. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Those weren't recordings. Those were real voices, real consciousness, real people somehow contained in that black metal box in his trailer. He should have stopped, should have pulled over, called the authorities, refused to continue. But 30 years of following instructions and not asking questions kept him driving. That, and the certain knowledge that if he deviated from the plan, people with guns and government credentials would appear to correct the situation. The voices continued for miles, growing more distinct. Marcus heard them begging, crying, screaming. He heard them call out names, Sarah, Michael, Jennifer, dozens of names, as if trying to remember who they'd been before ending up in that container. Near the Colorado border, the voices changed. They stopped begging and started warning. Turn around, driver, don't take us there. They'll do to you what they did to us. It starts with questions. They ask you questions and you answer truthfully because you don't know why you shouldn't. Then they put you in the box. We were drivers once, like you. We hauled this same container to different locations, then something happened. Then we were in the box. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. He checked his GPS compulsively, watching the blue dot crawl across the screen toward Denver, toward whatever facility awaited his delivery. "What are you?" Marcus asked out loud, not sure if the voices could hear him. They could. They answered in a chorus of overlapping responses. "We're echoes. We're copies. We're the consciousness of drivers who came before you. They scan your brain when you arrive, take an imprint, store it in the container, keep it preserved at exactly 32 degrees. You're carrying us to Denver so they can add more of us to the collection." Marcus felt sick. He was transporting human consciousness, minds extracted from previous drivers and stored in some kind of biological matrix kept just above freezing. How many people were in that box? How long had they been there? "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why do this?" "Backup," one voice said. "They're creating backup copies of human consciousness, experimenting with storage methods, transfer protocols, digital preservation of the human mind. We're test subjects, failed experiments, consciousness that got copied but couldn't be transferred back. We're stuck in the container, aware but unable to die, unable to escape. And you're about to join us." Marcus almost jerked the wheel, almost sent his truck off the road in panic. But he forced himself to stay calm, to think. If what the voices said was true, he couldn't simply refuse the delivery. The people running this operation wouldn't let him walk away with knowledge of what they were doing. His only chance was to destroy the container. But how? He couldn't open it. The voices had warned against that. He couldn't simply drive off a cliff. He'd die and the container might survive. He needed something that would completely destroy whatever biological matrix was storing these consciousness imprints. Fire. Fire would work. But starting a fire that would destroy the container without killing himself first would be tricky. Marcus pulled off at a rest area near the Colorado-New Mexico border. It was 3 in the morning, the facility nearly deserted. He parked far from the buildings and other vehicles, shut off his engine, and sat thinking. The voices had fallen silent, as if sensing his intent. Marcus grabbed his emergency road flare kit. Every trucker carried flares for breakdowns and accidents. He climbed out of his cab and walked back to his trailer. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily, maintaining its precise 32 degrees. Marcus placed flares around the trailer's wheels and undercarriage, creating a ring of potential ignition sources. Then he used his pocket knife to cut the diesel fuel line running to the refrigeration unit. Fuel began dripping onto the ground, pooling beneath the trailer. Marcus walked back to his cab and grabbed his CB radio. He called the emergency number on the card. "Report," the professional voice answered. "This is Marcus DeLuca. Your container is about to be destroyed. I'm burning the trailer and everything in it." "Stand down, Mr. DeLuca. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly. You're kidnapping consciousness, stealing people's minds, keeping them trapped and aware in a frozen box. That ends now. We'll pay you triple, quadruple. Name your price." "Some things aren't for sale." Marcus hung up. He lit one of the flares and tossed it toward the trailer. The diesel fuel ignited immediately, flames racing around the trailer's undercarriage. The other flares caught, and within seconds the trailer was engulfed in fire. Marcus stood at a safe distance and watched it burn. He heard sirens approaching. The rest area staff must have called 911. But more concerning were the black SUVs he saw racing down the highway toward his position, coming from both directions. The government cleaners were coming to contain the situation. Marcus didn't run. There was nowhere to go. He'd destroyed evidence of a classified program, probably broken dozens of laws he didn't know existed. The men in the SUVs would arrest him, possibly worse. But as the trailer burned and the container inside was consumed by flames reaching over 1,000 degrees, Marcus heard something that made him smile despite the terrible situation he'd created for himself. The voices were singing, all of them dozens of consciousness imprints singing together as the heat finally destroyed whatever biological matrix had been their prison. They sang with joy, with relief, with gratitude for the oblivion that fire would bring. And then, as the container's structural integrity failed and the fire reached critical temperature, the voices went silent. Not abruptly, but fading gradually like a song ending on a soft note. They were finally, truly gone. The SUVs arrived. Men in dark suits emerged, guns drawn, faces grim. Marcus raised his hands in surrender. They took him to a facility, not a jail, not a police station, somewhere else entirely. They questioned him for hours, days, weeks. Marcus told them everything he'd heard, everything the voices had said. He admitted destroying the container and refused to apologize for it. Eventually, they offered him a deal. Sign a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent him from ever discussing what happened, accept a financial settlement that would ensure his comfortable silence. Forget everything he'd learned about consciousness preservation research. The alternative was to disappear into the legal system, facing charges under laws classified above his security clearance, spending decades in a prison that didn't officially exist. Marcus signed. He took the money. He kept silent. But Marcus DeLuca never drove a truck again. He couldn't. Every load might be another container of stolen consciousness, more people trapped and aware and desperate for release. He couldn't risk hauling that cargo, couldn't risk becoming part of the system that created it. He lives quietly now, in a small house in Montana, far from highways and logistics hubs. But Marcus thinks about those voices often. He wonders how many other containers are out there, how many other drivers are unknowingly transporting human consciousness preserved in frozen biological matrices. How many more copies are being made of people who don't know their minds have been stolen? And Marcus wonders if somewhere there's now a copy of his own consciousness in a container. They'd scanned him, after all, during the initial questioning. Standard security protocol, they'd said. Medical evaluation. Had they made a copy of Marcus's mind? Was there another Marcus trapped in darkness, stored at exactly 32 degrees, whispering desperately to the next driver who hauled the container? The thought keeps him awake most nights. He stares at the ceiling and listens to the silence, grateful that at least he's in his own body and his own mind, still autonomous and aware in the way humans are supposed to be. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Marcus thinks he hears them. Faint voices whispering in a language he doesn't recognize, calling his name, thanking him for the fire, warning him that the program continues, and more consciousness imprints are being created every day. The load that whispered taught Marcus that cargo isn't always what it seems, that biological research materials might mean something far more horrifying than lab samples or tissues, and that sometimes the most important thing a driver can do is refuse to complete the delivery. He burned that bridge the night he lit those flares, and although it cost him his career, his freedom, and possibly his own mental autonomy, Marcus has never regretted it. Because some loads should never reach their destination, some deliveries should never be completed, and some cargo should be destroyed rather than transported, regardless of the consequences. The voices are silent now, at least the ones from that particular container. But Marcus knows there are others, countless others, being created and transported and stored in facilities he'll never see. And all he can do is live with the knowledge, keep silent as agreed, and hope that someday someone else will have the courage to light the flares and set those trapped minds free. Story 4. The Rest. Stop that reset. Frank Delgado had been hauling freight for 29 years, and in that time he'd stopped at hundreds of rest areas across America. They were all essentially the same. Parking lots, restrooms, vending machines, picnic tables, maybe a pet area. Utilitarian spaces where drivers could take mandatory breaks, use facilities, and get back on the road. Frank had never given them much thought until September of 2023 when he stopped at a rest area in Wyoming that existed in a loop of its own creation. Frank was driving from Boise to Omaha, hauling a load of agricultural equipment across the empty stretches of southern Wyoming. The route followed Interstate 80, a highway Frank had driven countless times. He knew every town, every exit, every landmark along the way. Around 2 in the morning, about 50 miles east of Rock Springs, Frank needed a rest break. His logs showed he'd been driving for nearly 11 hours, close to his legal limit. He needed to stop, rest for the mandatory 10 hours, then continue. The rest area appeared in his headlights exactly where it should be, a standard Wyoming rest stop with the usual facilities. Frank pulled in, found a parking spot away from the handful of other trucks already there, and shut down his engine. The night was cool, clear, with stars visible in the unpolluted Wyoming sky. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Frank used the restroom, bought a candy bar from a vending machine, and walked around for a few minutes to stretch his legs before returning to his truck to sleep. He noticed a few other drivers doing the same, normal rest stop activity. One driver, a younger man in his 30s, nodded to Frank as they passed. Frank nodded back. Frank climbed into his sleeper berth, set his alarm for 10 hours, and fell asleep within minutes. He was used to sleeping in his truck, had done it thousands of times. The familiar sounds of other trucks idling, the occasional door closing, the hum of refrigeration units. All of it was white noise that actually helped him sleep. When Frank's alarm woke him, sunlight was streaming through his curtains. He checked his phone. 10 hours had passed exactly. Frank sat up, stretched, and prepared to get back on the road. He'd grab coffee from the vending machine, do a quick walk-around inspection of his truck, then continue east toward Omaha. But when Frank climbed out of his cab and looked around the rest area, something felt wrong. The other trucks that had been parked there when he'd arrived, they were all still there, in exactly the same positions, the same vehicles, the same parking spots, as if they hadn't moved at all during his 10-hour rest. Frank walked toward the restroom building, his unease growing. The same younger driver he'd seen the night before was walking toward the building from the opposite direction. The man nodded to Frank as they passed. Frank stopped. "Didn't I see you last night?" The young driver looked confused. "Last night? I just got here 20 minutes ago, pulled in around 2 a.m. Frank checked his phone. It showed 12:07 p.m. It should have been noon, 10 hours after his 2 a.m. arrival. But the driver was claiming it was 2 in the morning right now. "What time do you have?" Frank asked. The young driver checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. Why? Frank's phone definitely showed 12:07 p.m. Daylight, but the young driver's watch showed 2:17 a.m. And now that Frank looked around more carefully, he noticed something impossible. The sun was setting, not rising. The light he'd thought was morning sun was actually evening light, coming from the west instead of east. Frank walked quickly back to his truck and checked his dash clock. It showed 2:17 a.m., matching the other driver's watch but contradicting his phone. Frank's GPS showed the correct date but was recalculating his position repeatedly, the blue dot jumping around the rest area as if it couldn't lock onto satellites properly. Something was very wrong with time at this rest area. Frank decided to leave immediately. He started his engine, prepared to pull out of his parking spot, and began driving toward the exit. The rest area had a simple loop design. You entered from the highway, drove through the parking lot, and exited back onto the highway via a separate ramp. Frank followed the exit road, watching for the on-ramp that would take him back to Interstate 80. But the exit road curved back around and deposited him at the entrance to the rest area again. Frank found himself driving back into the same parking lot he'd just tried to leave. He tried again, this time paying careful attention to the road. The exit was clearly marked with signs, but somehow following the exit road took him in a circle back to the entrance. The rest area's geography didn't make sense. The exit and entrance should have been on opposite sides, connected to different parts of the highway. Instead, they were the same road, creating an impossible loop. Frank parked again and got out, his heart racing. He walked to the edge of the rest area where the pavement met the grass and dirt beyond. In the distance, he could see Interstate 80, trucks and cars moving along it in both directions. But between the rest area and the highway was a gap he couldn't quite define. Not a physical barrier, but something else. A shimmer in the air like heat distortion. Frank tried to walk toward the highway, but with each step the distance seemed to increase rather than decrease. The highway remained the same distance away no matter how far he walked. Eventually, Frank turned around and found himself back at the rest area parking lot, having traveled in a circle without realizing it. The rest area was a trap, a closed loop in space and time that prevented anyone from leaving. Frank grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Road Dog at the rest area eastbound on 80, about 50 miles past Rock Springs. Is anyone hearing this?" A voice responded immediately. "This is Nighthawk, I'm hearing you. But there's no rest area where you're describing. The nearest rest stop eastbound is about 90 miles from Rock Springs. I'm looking right at it. I'm parked here. There are other trucks here. Buddy, I drove past that area an hour ago. There's nothing there but empty highway. You feeling okay?" Frank looked around the rest area. The other trucks were still there, still parked in their same positions. The young driver who'd claimed it was 2:17 a.m. was walking toward the restroom building again, making the same motions Frank had seen before. That's when Frank realized what was happening. The rest area wasn't just trapping people in space, it was trapping them in time, creating loops where the same moments repeated endlessly. That young driver had probably been walking to the restroom over and over for hours, days, maybe longer, unaware that he was repeating the same actions. Frank ran to the young driver. "Hey, stop! Don't go in there!" The driver turned, confused. "What's wrong? How long have you been here, really? Think carefully. How long?" The driver frowned. "I told you I just arrived, 20 minutes ago." "What day is it?" "Tuesday, September 12th. Frank's phone showed September 13th. He'd arrived on the night of the 12th, slept for 10 hours, which should have made it the 13th, but the driver was still experiencing the 12th. "Listen to me," Frank said urgently. "This rest area is trapped in some kind of time loop. We need to find a way out before we're stuck here permanently." The young driver's confusion turned to concern. "Time loop? That's crazy." "Then explain why my phone shows a different time than your watch. Explain why the exit road leads back to the entrance. Explain why you keep walking to the restroom doing the exact same motion I saw you do before." The driver looked at his watch, then at Frank's phone, then around the rest area with growing alarm. Oh God, you're right. I remember pulling in, but I don't remember anything after that except walking to the restroom over and over. How long have I really been here? I don't know, but we need to find out who else is trapped and figure out how to escape. Frank and the young driver, who introduced himself as Kevin Martinez, began checking the other trucks in the parking lot. Most were empty, their drivers presumably caught in their own loop somewhere in the rest area. But they found 3 other drivers who were aware enough to respond. An older woman named Dorothy Chen had been trapped for what she estimated was 3 days, though her watch insisted only an hour had passed. A middle-aged man named Richard Foster thought he'd been there for a week, but couldn't be certain. And a younger woman named Amanda Price couldn't remember arriving at all. Her earliest memory was walking through the parking lot over and over. "There has to be a pattern," Frank said. Something that determines who stays aware and who gets lost in the loops. Dorothy spoke up. I've noticed that if you do the same thing repeatedly, you start to fade. Richard was walking laps around the parking lot when I found him. He'd done maybe 50 laps and was starting to lose coherence. I snapped him out of it, got him to stop moving in a pattern. So the rest area wants us to repeat actions, Kevin said. It feeds on repetition. Which means to escape, we need to do something completely unpredictable, Frank concluded. Something the rest area hasn't seen before. Something that breaks its pattern. They spent the next several hours, though time was nearly meaningless in this place, trying different approaches. They tried leaving in a convoy, all 5 trucks driving toward the exit simultaneously. They ended up back at the entrance. They tried walking in a straight line away from the rest area in different directions. They all ended up back at the parking lot. They tried calling 911, but the calls either didn't connect or reached dispatchers who insisted there was no rest area at their location. The rest area was hermetically sealed from normal space and time, a pocket dimension that had trapped travelers and kept them in repeating loops. Frank was beginning to despair when Amanda said something interesting. I've been thinking about my arrival. I can't remember it, but I have this feeling that I think I died. The others stared at her. What do you mean, died? Richard asked. I mean, I think I had an accident. I remember being very tired, maybe falling asleep at the wheel, then nothing. Then I was here. What if this place isn't trapping living people? What if it only catches people who died on this stretch of highway? The idea sent chills through Frank. He thought back to his arrival. Had anything unusual happened? He'd been tired, close to his legal limit for driving hours. Had he fallen asleep for a moment? Had his truck drifted off the road? He couldn't remember clearly. Dorothy pulled up her sleeve, revealing a long scar on her arm. This was from my accident 5 years ago. I crashed during a snowstorm. My truck went off the road. The last thing I remember before waking up in a hospital was darkness and cold. But maybe I didn't wake up in a hospital. Maybe I woke up here. One by one, the others examined their own memories and found gaps, inconsistencies, moments that might have been deaths rather than near misses. So we're dead, Kevin said quietly. This is some kind of afterlife, a purgatory for truck drivers. Or we're in the moment of dying, Frank suggested. That moment stretched out infinitely, creating a loop we experience as this rest area. Time doesn't work normally in the instant of death. Maybe we're all still in our trucks, still crashing or having heart attacks or falling asleep, and our consciousness is experiencing this extended moment while our bodies die in real time. The implication was horrifying. If Frank was right, there was no escape. They were already dead or dying, trapped in a liminal space between life and whatever came after. But Frank refused to accept that. Even if we're dying, our consciousness is still here, still aware. That means we have some agency, some ability to choose. And I choose to find a way out. He walked to the center of the parking lot and stood there thinking. The rest area trapped people in loops by encouraging repetition. But what was the opposite of repetition? Randomness? No. Randomness was just unpredictable. Patterns. The true opposite of repetition was termination. Ending. Choosing to stop. I think I know how to escape, Frank announced. We have to stop doing anything. Complete stillness. No actions, no motion, no repetition. We have to become so perfectly still that the rest area has nothing to loop. Nothing to feed on. We have to basically die while we're already dead. That sounds like giving up, Richard said. It's not giving up. It's refusing to participate in the rest area's system. Think about it. This place traps us by making us repeat actions. Walking, driving, sleeping, eating. As long as we keep performing actions, we stay trapped in loops. But if we stop completely, achieve perfect stillness, maybe we slip through. The others were skeptical, but they had no better ideas. They gathered in the center of the parking lot, sat down on the pavement, and tried to achieve complete stillness. No fidgeting, no adjusting position, no movement at all. It was incredibly difficult. The human body wants to move, to shift weight, to breathe deeply, to blink. But Frank and the others forced themselves into the deepest stillness they could manage, barely breathing, eyes unfocused, minds as blank as possible. Minutes passed, or hours, or seconds. Time was meaningless. Frank felt himself beginning to fade, not dying but transitioning, slipping between states of being. The rest area became translucent around him. He could see through the parking lot to something else. The actual highway, real space, normal time. And on that highway he saw emergency vehicles, flashing lights, twisted metal. He saw his own truck, crashed into the median barrier, cab crumpled, Frank's body slumped behind the wheel. He had died, or was dying. This extended moment in the rest area was his consciousness's last experience before final termination. But as Frank achieved deeper stillness, as he stopped clinging to existence and accepted the end, something shifted. The rest area released its hold. Frank felt himself moving forward, not in space, but in some other direction, through the moment of death and out the other side. The parking lot disappeared. The other drivers vanished. Frank found himself in darkness, but it was different from the darkness of the rest area. This darkness was warm, accepting, complete. And in that darkness, Frank understood that he'd escaped the loop not by fighting it, but by accepting death, by stopping his resistance to the inevitable. The rest stop, that reset, had caught Frank in the moment of his dying, had stretched that moment into an eternity of loops and repetitions. But by choosing to stop, to become perfectly still, to accept the end, Frank had slipped through and continued to whatever came next. The other drivers, Dorothy, Kevin, Richard, Amanda, they remained in the rest area, at least for now. Still trapped, still looping, still trying to escape. But Frank had shown them the way. And eventually, when they were ready, when they achieved that perfect stillness and acceptance, they too would slip through and move on. The rest area still exists, somewhere on Interstate 80 in Wyoming, though no map shows its location and no living driver has ever reported seeing it. It catches only those who die on that stretch of highway, trapping their consciousness in repeating loops until they learn to stop resisting and accept the end. Frank Delgado learned that lesson, and in accepting death, he escaped the trap and found whatever lies beyond. The rest stop, that reset, couldn't hold him once he stopped trying to leave and simply chose to be still, to end, to let go. The loop was only a prison for those who kept running through it. For those who stopped, who achieved perfect stillness, it became a doorway to whatever comes after the moment of death. A transition point rather than a trap. And somewhere in a rest area that exists outside normal space and time. 4 other drivers sit in the parking lot, working toward that same stillness, that same acceptance, waiting for the moment when they too can slip through the loop and continue their journey beyond the highway, beyond the truck, beyond the body that died miles ago on a stretch of empty road in the American West. Story 5. The Voice on Channel 19. Raymond Booker had been driving trucks for 34 years, and in all that time his CB radio had been a constant companion. The chatter of other drivers, the warnings about speed traps and weather, the occasional joke or story shared to pass the lonely miles, all of it flowed through Channel 19, the unofficial trucker channel. Raymond had heard thousands of conversations, connected with countless drivers he'd never meet face to face. The CB was the voice of the road, the social network of the highway. In May of 2023, Raymond started hearing a voice on Channel 19 that shouldn't have been there. A voice that knew things it couldn't know, that warned about events before they happened, that seemed to exist outside normal time. And the more Raymond listened to that voice, the more he realized it was trying to save his life, or trap him in a fate worse than death. Raymond was hauling electronics from Dallas to Chicago, a straightforward 2-day run up Interstate 35 and then east through Missouri and Illinois. He left Dallas on a Wednesday evening, planning to drive through the night and reach Oklahoma City by dawn. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and Raymond's CB crackled with the usual trucker chatter. Discussions about fuel prices, complaints about dispatchers, warnings about construction zones. Around midnight, somewhere north of Gainesville, Texas, a new voice cut into the conversation. It was male, middle-aged, with an odd quality that Raymond couldn't quite identify. Like the voice was being transmitted through water or from a great distance. "Raymond Booker, you need to slow down. Traffic accident ahead at mile, marker 497. 4-car pileup, emergency vehicles not on scene yet. Slow down now." Raymond's hands tightened on the wheel. The voice had used his name. How did it know his name? He grabbed his CB handset. "This is Road King. Who's calling me out by name?" No response. But Raymond did slow down, his instinct for caution overriding his confusion. 2 miles ahead, he crested a hill and saw it. A fresh accident, cars scattered across both lanes, no emergency vehicles yet, exactly as the voice had described. Raymond braked hard, his truck shuddering as he brought it safely to a stop. Other vehicles weren't so lucky. Raymond watched in his mirrors as a car behind him failed to slow in time, swerving onto the shoulder and nearly rolling. But Raymond had stopped safely with room to spare because the voice had warned him. Emergency vehicles arrived within minutes. Traffic was redirected. Raymond eventually continued north, but his mind kept returning to that voice. How had it known about the accident before the emergency vehicles arrived? How had it known his name? Over the next several hours, the voice returned periodically, always offering warnings or information. "Raymond, Way Station at mile marker 523 is running full inspections tonight. Your left trailer light is out. Fix it before you arrive or you'll get cited." Raymond checked his trailer lights at the next rest stop. The left running light was indeed out. The bulb burned out. He replaced it from his spare parts kit, grateful for the warning. "Raymond, the truck stop at exit 65 has bad diesel. Several drivers reported fuel system problems. Use the station at exit 78 instead." Raymond took the advice, fueling at the suggested location. Later, he heard other drivers on the CB complaining about contaminated fuel at exit 65, exactly as the voice had warned. "Raymond, there's a drunk driver in a blue sedan weaving through traffic 15 miles ahead. Stay in the right lane and let him pass. He'll crash in 10 minutes, but you won't be involved if you stay right." Raymond stayed right. 10 minutes later, he saw the blue sedan crashed into the median barrier, police lights already on scene. The voice was never wrong. Every warning, every prediction came true exactly as described, and always the voice addressed Raymond by name, as if speaking only to him, though it broadcast on Channel 19 where anyone could hear. By the time Raymond reached Oklahoma City at dawn, he was deeply unsettled. The voice had saved him from multiple dangerous situations, had given him information he shouldn't have had. But Raymond couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong about this. He pulled into a truck stop and tried to research the phenomenon. Were other drivers hearing similar voices? Were there reports of prophetic CB transmissions? Raymond searched online forums and trucker message boards but found nothing comparable. He called his dispatcher. "Hey, this might sound crazy, but has anyone reported weird CB transmissions lately? Like voices that predict things before they happen?" The dispatcher laughed. "Raymond, you been driving too long without sleep? CB radios don't predict the future." I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you there's been a voice on Channel 19 giving me warnings that turn out to be accurate. Probably another driver with a police scanner relaying what he's hearing. Nothing supernatural about that. Raymond wanted to believe that explanation, but it didn't fit. Police scanners wouldn't explain how the voice knew Raymond's name or how it predicted events minutes before they occurred, before emergency services were even dispatched. Raymond continued north through Oklahoma and into Kansas. The voice remained mostly silent during the day, but as evening approached and darkness fell, it returned. "Raymond, we need to talk. Take exit 127 in 15 miles. There's an abandoned truck stop there. Park and turn off your engine. I'll explain everything." Every instinct told Raymond to ignore this instruction. Taking an exit to an abandoned location based on the advice of a mysterious CB voice was potentially dangerous. But Raymond's curiosity outweighed his caution. The voice had saved him multiple times. Maybe it deserved a chance to explain itself. Exit 127 led to an old truck stop that had clearly been closed for years. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown, the building's windows boarded up, the gas pumps removed. Raymond parked in the empty lot, shut off his engine, and waited. The CB crackled to life. "Thank you for stopping, Raymond. I know this is frightening and confusing. I need you to understand what I am and why I've been helping you." "Who are you?" Raymond asked into his handset. "I'm you. Or rather, I'm a version of you from a timeline that doesn't exist anymore. In that timeline, you didn't slow down at mile marker 497. You hit the accident at full speed. Your truck crashed, caught fire. You died, Raymond. But somehow my consciousness persisted, trapped in the CB frequency, able to observe this timeline where things went differently." Raymond felt ice water in his veins. "That's impossible." "Is it? You've been hearing my voice for over 12 hours. You've watched every prediction come true. You know I'm real. The question isn't whether I'm possible, it's what I want from you." "What do you want?" "I want you to make different choices than I did. I want you to avoid the mistakes that killed me." "There's another decision point coming, Raymond. In your original timeline, the one I came from, you take a load from Chicago to Seattle. But there's a storm in Montana. Your truck slides off an icy road. You survive the crash, but you're trapped in the wreckage for 3 days before anyone finds you. You lose both legs to frostbite. Your trucking career ends. Your life becomes something you wouldn't recognize. So you're trying to save me from that?" "I'm trying to save both of us. If you make different choices, if you avoid that Montana route, then maybe my timeline and yours can merge. Maybe I can stop being a ghost in the CB frequency and become whole again." Raymond sat in his truck trying to process this. He was talking to a dead version of himself, a ghost that existed as electromagnetic energy on Channel 19, trapped between timelines, trying to change the past to alter its own fate. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Raymond asked. "You don't. But consider this. I could have let you crash at mile marker 497. I could have let you fuel up with contaminated diesel. I could have let the drunk driver hit you. I've been protecting you, Raymond, because in saving you, I save myself. What happens if I refuse? If I take the Montana route anyway?" Silence for a long moment. Then I stay trapped, and you lose your legs, and we both live half-lives, neither of us whole, both of us broken by choices that didn't need to be made. And if I take your advice, if I avoid Montana, then maybe we merge. Maybe the timeline where I died gets overwritten by the timeline where you survive. Maybe I get to be alive again, or maybe I just stop existing. I don't know. I'm gambling that changing your future will change my past." Raymond thought about this for a long time. The voice claiming to be his future self was asking him to change his plans based on predictions of events that hadn't happened yet. It was insane, but everything the voice had told him so far had been accurate. "Okay," Raymond finally said. "I'll avoid Montana. When I get to Chicago, I'll turn down the Seattle load. I'll take something else, something that doesn't go through Montana in winter." "Thank you, Raymond. Thank you for giving us both a chance." Raymond continued his drive, reaching Chicago the next evening. He delivered his electronics load and immediately called his dispatcher. "I need to turn down the Seattle run. Give it to someone else." The dispatcher was confused. "Why? You're scheduled for it. The load's ready to go." I have a bad feeling about it. Weather in Montana is supposed to be terrible. I don't want to risk it." After some arguing, the dispatcher agreed and assigned Raymond a different load. Furniture to Memphis, routing through southern states where winter weather wasn't a concern. As Raymond drove south instead of west, the voice on Channel 19 returned one last time. "You did it. You changed the timeline. I can feel it, Raymond. Things are different now. The future where I died is being overwritten. You're creating a new branch, a new possibility. I don't know if I'll merge with you or simply cease to exist, but either way, thank you. You've freed us both." The voice faded, becoming static, then silence. Raymond never heard it again. But in the months that followed, Raymond noticed strange changes. Memories that didn't quite fit. Skills he didn't remember. Learning knowledge he shouldn't have. It was subtle but unmistakable. He was experiencing memories from the other timeline, the one where his future self had died and become trapped in the CB frequency. Raymond remembered the crash at mile marker 497, felt phantom pain from injuries he'd never actually sustained. He remembered being trapped in his wrecked truck in Montana, remembered the bitter cold and the slow onset of frostbite, remembered the surgery that took his legs. None of it had happened to him in this timeline, but the memories were real, imported from the version of Raymond who had lived and died differently. The two timelines were merging just as the voice had predicted. Raymond was becoming a composite of himself and his alternate self, carrying memories from both paths, existing as a fusion of what had been and what might have been. It was disorienting, occasionally disturbing, but also strangely comforting. Raymond felt more complete now, more aware of the fragility of choices and the malleability of fate. He drove more carefully, made decisions more thoughtfully, understood that every choice created branches and consequences that rippled through time. And Raymond never forgot that somewhere, in some frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum, his voice had once been trapped, warning his past self, trying to change history to save them both from a fate that had seemed inevitable. The voice on Channel 19 taught Raymond that time wasn't as linear as he'd believed, that consciousness could persist in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most important warnings came from the version of yourself that didn't survive, reaching back through impossible channels to give you the information you needed to make different choices. Raymond Booker drove trucks for another 15 years before retiring. He never took loads through Montana in winter. He never crashed on an icy road. He never lost his legs. And he never heard that warning voice again. But sometimes, late at night on empty highways, Raymond would key his CB and speak into Channel 19, just in case some other driver needed a warning, needed information from a future that might still be changed. He'd broadcast locations of accidents before they happened, warn about weather conditions, share predictions about events that hadn't yet occurred. Other drivers thought he was crazy or prophetic or somehow connected to emergency services. They didn't understand that Raymond was simply returning the favor, using knowledge from his merged timelines to warn others the way he'd been warned. Because Raymond understood now that the CB wasn't just a communication device, it was a bridge between timelines, a channel through which consciousness could travel when trapped between life and death, between what was and what might have been. The voice on Channel 19 had saved Raymond's life by changing his future. And now, Raymond tried to do the same for others, broadcasting warnings and predictions, hoping that somewhere, somewhen, a driver would hear his voice and make a different choice, creating a better branch in the infinite tree of possible timelines. Story 6. The Passenger Manifest. Elaine Morrison had been driving trucks for 26 years, and for most of that time she'd hauled regular freight, consumer goods, industrial supplies, nothing unusual. But in June of 2023, Elaine accepted a specialized job that would reveal something terrifying about the nature of human cargo and the destinations that existed beyond normal maps. The job came through a broker Elaine had never worked with before. The pay was exceptional, 3 times her normal rate. For what seemed like a simple run from New York to a location in Maine, the cargo was listed as medical transport requiring climate control and careful handling, which Elaine interpreted as organs for transplant or similar time-sensitive medical materials. She picked up the cargo from a nondescript medical facility in Brooklyn at midnight. The staff loaded a specialized container into her refrigerated trailer, a white rectangular unit about the size of a large coffin with biohazard symbols and temperature monitoring equipment. They handed Elaine a sealed envelope containing the delivery address and specific instructions. Maintain exactly 37 degrees Celsius, the facility manager told her. Do not open the container under any circumstances. Do not deviate from the route provided. Any deviation will void the contract and result in severe penalties. Elaine nodded, secured the container properly, and opened the envelope. Inside was a detailed route map and a passenger manifest. The manifest confused her immediately. It listed names, 23 names, all with dates of birth and dates of death. Every person listed had died between 1995 and 2023, their deaths separated by years. Below the names was a single line. Estimated arrival, 13 passengers. Acceptable loss, 10 passengers. Elaine stared at the manifest, trying to make sense of it. Why would a medical cargo have a passenger manifest? And what did acceptable loss mean in this context? She called the broker's number from the paperwork. It rang once and went to voicemail. Elaine left a message asking for clarification about the manifest, then decided to proceed with the delivery. The pay was too good to turn down over what might be a clerical error. Elaine drove through the night, following the route north through Connecticut and into Massachusetts. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily, maintaining the precise temperature. Everything seemed normal until Elaine's CB radio crackled to life around 3 in the morning. Hello? Is someone there? Please, we need help. The voice was female, young, frightened. Elaine grabbed her handset. This is Elaine Morrison. Who's calling? My name is Jennifer Caldwell. I don't know where I am. It's dark and cold and I can hear others, but I can't see them. Please, where are we going? Elaine felt her heart hammering. Jennifer, where are you calling from? What's your location? I don't know. I was in an accident, I think, on the highway. And then I was here, in the dark, with all these other people. Some of them are crying. Please, can you help us? Elaine pulled over to the shoulder and grabbed the passenger manifest from the envelope. She scanned the names, and there it was. Jennifer Caldwell, born 1998, died 2023. Died 3 months ago in a car accident on the Long Island Expressway. Jennifer, Elaine said carefully, I'm looking at a manifest here. It has your name on it. It says you died in an accident. Silence on the CB, then sobbing. No, I'm not dead. I can't be dead. I'm talking to you. Dead people can't talk. But they can, Elaine realized with mounting horror. Dead people can talk if their consciousness is somehow trapped and transported in a specialized container. preserved at exactly body temperature, kept aware and conscious despite the death of their physical forms. Elaine wasn't hauling medical cargo. She was hauling souls, human consciousness extracted from bodies at the moment of death and stored in some kind of biological or technological medium being transported to where? For what purpose? Elaine climbed out of her truck and walked back to her trailer. She opened the rear doors and stared at the white container. It looked medical, sterile, but now Elaine understood what it really was. A prison for consciousness, a way of capturing human awareness and moving it from one location to another. The manifest had listed 23 names, but estimated only 13 would arrive, acceptable loss of 10 passengers. That meant 10 of the consciousness trapped in the container wouldn't survive the journey. They would fade, dissipate, cease to exist during transport. Elaine grabbed the container's temperature control panel. Should she shut it down? Would that release the trapped consciousness, or would it kill them? She didn't know enough about the technology or process to make that decision. Her CB crackled again. Multiple voices now, all talking over each other. Where are we? I want to go home. It hurts, everything hurts. Let us out, please let us out. 23 voices, all transmitting on the same frequency, all reaching out from inside the container through some mechanism Elaine didn't understand. Elaine made a decision. She wasn't going to complete this delivery. Whatever facility awaited in Maine, whatever they planned to do with these trapped souls, she couldn't be part of it. She climbed back in her cab, started her engine, and turned around, heading back toward New York. Her phone rang immediately, the broker's number. Elaine answered. Ms. Morrison, GPS shows you've deviated from the route. Return to the specified path immediately. I'm not delivering this cargo. I don't transport people, dead or alive, without knowing where they're going and why. You signed a contract. You accepted the payment. The cargo must be delivered. Then come get it yourself. I'm returning it to the pickup location. That's not possible. The consciousness in the container has been separated from their bodies. If you return them to New York, there's nothing to reintegrate them with. They'll simply cease to exist. What happens if I complete the delivery? A pause. Then, the facility in Maine is researching consciousness transfer and preservation. The subjects in your container are candidates for experimental procedures. Some will be successfully transferred to new hosts. Others will be used for calibration and testing. It's important work, Ms. Morrison. These people died anyway. We're giving them a chance to continue existing in some form. You're using them as lab rats. We're advancing human knowledge about consciousness and mortality. The subjects in your container would have simply died and ceased to exist. We're offering them purpose, even in death. Elaine felt sick. The facility was harvesting consciousness from newly dead people, storing them in containers and transporting them to research facilities for experimentation. And they were using truckers like Elaine as unwitting carriers. How many loads like this have you transported? Elaine asked. This is our 47th shipment in the past 2 years. You're one of many carriers we've employed. Most don't ask questions. They just want the premium pay. And the drivers who do ask questions, what happens to them? Silence. Then the connection ended. Elaine understood. The drivers who asked too many questions probably ended up in the containers themselves, their consciousness harvested and transported, becoming part of the cargo they'd refused to deliver. She drove faster, trying to reach New York before the broker's people could intercept her. The voices in the container continued broadcasting on her CB, their distress growing as they sensed something was wrong. Please don't take us there, Jennifer Caldwell begged. I've been listening to the others, the ones who were in previous shipments. They say the facility does horrible things. They separate consciousness into fragments. Test how long awareness can persist without physical form. Experiment with merging multiple minds. Please, if we have to cease existing, let it be quick. Don't take us there. Elaine was crying now, driving through tears, her hands shaking on the wheel. She'd stumbled into something monstrous, a secret industry that harvested and traded human consciousness like any other commodity. She passed through Hartford, Connecticut, still heading south toward New York. But on the outskirts of the city, Elaine saw black SUVs blocking the highway ahead. Men in suits stood beside the vehicles, clearly waiting for her. The broker's people, coming to enforce the contract. Elaine took an exit, before reaching them, diverting onto local roads. But the SUVs followed, maintaining visual contact. They weren't trying to stop her forcefully, not yet, but they were making it clear she couldn't escape. Elaine's mind raced. She couldn't complete the delivery. She couldn't return the cargo. She couldn't outrun the SUVs. Her only option was to destroy the container, to release the trapped consciousness, even if that meant they would cease to exist. She pulled into an abandoned parking lot, jumped out, and ran to her trailer. The men from the SUVs were approaching on foot, moving quickly. Elaine didn't have much time. She grabbed a tire iron from her truck and smashed the container's temperature control panel. Alarms blared as the cooling system failed. The temperature inside the container began to rise rapidly. "I'm sorry," Elaine said into her CB. "I'm so sorry, but this is better than what they'll do to you." Jennifer Caldwell's voice came through one last time. "Thank you for trying, for caring, for not just delivering us like cargo. Thank you." The voices faded as the temperature climbed past 50 degrees Celsius, past 60, past 70. Whatever biological or technological medium had been sustaining the trapped consciousness couldn't function at such high temperatures. The awareness that had been Jennifer Caldwell and 22 others dissipated, their existence ending not with pain but with a gradual fade into non-being. The men from the SUVs reached Elaine just as the container's lights went dark. They looked at the destroyed equipment, at Elaine standing there with the tire iron, and their faces showed anger mixed with resignation. "You've destroyed company property," one of them said. "That's a breach of contract." "Sue me," Elaine replied, "or arrest me, or whatever you do to people who don't cooperate. But I'm not transporting consciousness anymore. I'm not part of this." They didn't arrest her. Instead, they made her sign additional non-disclosure agreements, threatened her with legal and financial consequences, and made it clear that speaking publicly about what she'd seen would result in serious problems. Then they disconnected her trailer, loaded it onto a flatbed truck, and drove away with the destroyed container and its empty vessel. Elaine never received payment for the job. Her trucking company dropped her contract, claiming she'd damaged a client's property. Other companies wouldn't hire her. She'd been blacklisted somehow, marked as unreliable. Elaine Morrison's trucking career ended that night in Connecticut. She lost her rig, her income, her livelihood. But she'd saved 23 people from a fate worse than death, being used as experimental subjects, their consciousness fragmented and tortured in the name of research. Or had she? Elaine couldn't be sure. Maybe destroying the container had simply ended their existence earlier than it would have ended anyway. Maybe some of them could have been transferred to new hosts, given new lives. Elaine had made the choice to grant them oblivion rather than risk subjecting them to experimentation. But she'd never know if it was the right choice. The passenger manifest haunts Elaine still. She kept a copy, those 23 names with their birth and death dates, the cold calculation of acceptable loss. She thinks about Jennifer Caldwell and the others, wonders if any fragment of their consciousness still exists somewhere, still aware, still trapped. And Elaine wonders how many other trucks are on America's highways right now, hauling similar containers, transporting harvested consciousness to facilities that experiment on the dead, treating human awareness as just another commodity to be bought and sold and studied. The passenger manifest taught Elaine that death isn't always the end, that consciousness can persist in technological prisons, and that the most horrifying cargo isn't hazardous materials or dangerous goods. It's human souls, trapped and aware, being delivered to destinations where their existence will be studied, fragmented, and eventually extinguished in the name of advancing knowledge about mortality and awareness. Elaine doesn't drive anymore, but she watches the trucks on the highway, the refrigerated containers with their biohazard symbols and temperature monitors, and she wonders, how many of them are hauling consciousness? How many drivers know what they're really transporting? How many Jennifer Caldwells are crying out on CB frequencies, begging for help that will never come? The questions haunt her, and the answers she suspects would be far more terrifying than the questions themselves. Story 7. The Highway That Collected Drivers. Thomas Webb had been driving trucks for 37 years, longer than most drivers lasted in the profession. At 62 years old, he was planning to retire within the year, looking forward to finally settling down and spending time with his grandchildren. But in July of 2023, Thomas drove a stretch of highway that wouldn't let him leave, that collected drivers the way some collectors gathered stamps or coins, preserving them in an eternal museum of transportation history. The route was simple: agricultural equipment from Fresno to Phoenix, following Highway 99 south through California's Central Valley, then crossing into Arizona via Interstate 10. Thomas had driven this route hundreds of times over his career, knew every town and landmark along the way. It was easy driving, good weather, nothing complicated. Thomas left Fresno just after dawn, planning to reach Phoenix by evening. The Central Valley stretched out before him, endless fields of crops, small towns scattered along the highway, the Sierra Nevada mountains visible in the distance to the east. It was beautiful in its own agricultural way, peaceful and familiar. Around noon, somewhere between Bakersfield and the Grapevine Pass, Thomas noticed something odd. The highway seemed different somehow, the pavement newer, the lane markings brighter, the signs in slightly different positions than he remembered. Nothing dramatic, just subtle changes that accumulated into a general sense of wrongness. Then Thomas saw the other trucks. They were parked along the shoulder in a neat line, stretching ahead as far as he could see. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all facing the same direction, all perfectly positioned as if arranged by some careful curator. The trucks ranged from modern recent models to antiques from the 1940s and 50s, an entire timeline of American trucking history parked along a highway shoulder. Thomas slowed down, staring at the collection. Every truck was pristine, perfectly maintained, gleaming in the afternoon sun. And standing beside each truck was a driver, some in modern clothing, some in vintage attire from decades past, all of them motionless, staring forward as if waiting for something. Thomas pulled onto the shoulder, intending to ask what was happening. As he climbed out of his cab, one of the drivers, a man in modern clothing, turned to look at him. The man's face was expressionless, his eyes glazed. "Welcome to the collection," the man said in a monotone voice. "Please take your place in line. Your position has been prepared." "Collection? What collection? What's going on?" The man gestured at the row of trucks. "The highway collects us. All drivers who reach this point become part of the permanent exhibition. You are number 743. Please take your position." Thomas backed away, fear flooding through him. "I'm not staying here. I've got a delivery to make." He climbed back in his truck and pulled onto the highway, accelerating away from the collected drivers. But as he drove, Thomas noticed that the trucks along the shoulder continued ahead of him, the line never ending. Every mile revealed more trucks, more drivers, an endless collection that stretched down the highway. And worse, his odometer stopped advancing. Despite driving at 65 miles per hour, his odometer remained fixed at the same number. He was moving but not traveling, like a treadmill that allowed motion without progress. Thomas's GPS showed him moving normally, the blue dot progressing down the highway. But the landscape outside contradicted this. He kept passing the same landmarks, the same exit signs, as if he was caught in a loop that allowed movement without advancement. He tried to exit the highway, but every off-ramp curved back onto the main road, depositing him back in the same lane, still surrounded by the endless line of collected trucks. Thomas grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Old Road heading south on 99. Does anyone copy?" A voice responded, elderly, tired, resigned. "I copy, Old Road. Been listening to drivers call for help on this channel for 47 years now. Never met one who escaped. Who are you? Where are you? I'm truck number 72 in the collection. Been parked here since 1976. The highway collected me while I was hauling produce to Los Angeles. Been here ever since, standing beside my truck, waiting. Waiting for what? I don't rightly know anymore. At first I thought it was temporary, that someone would come help me escape, but nobody came. Other drivers arrived, took their positions in line, and we all just stayed. The highway keeps us preserved somehow. We don't age, don't need food or water, don't sleep. We just exist here, part of the collection, displayed along the shoulder for what? I don't know. Maybe there's no purpose. Maybe the highway just collects us because that's what it does." Thomas felt panic rising. He pushed his accelerator to the floor, his truck roaring as the speedometer climbed past 80, past 90. But the odometer still didn't advance. He was traveling at high speed without covering any distance, stuck in a section of highway that existed outside normal space. Another voice came through the CB, this one female, younger. "I'm truck number 412. Collected in 2009. I've been here 14 years. At first I tried to escape, tried ramming through barriers, tried driving off-road, tried everything. Nothing works. The highway won't release us. Eventually you stop trying. You accept your position in the collection. You stand beside your truck and become part of the exhibit." "Exhibit for who?" Thomas demanded. "Who's looking at us?" "Nobody. That's the strange part. There are no visitors, no audience, just us drivers and our trucks preserved along this highway, arranged in chronological order. It's like a museum with no visitors, a collection with no collector, just an endless line of trucks and drivers existing for no apparent purpose." Thomas drove for hours, or tried to. Time became meaningless when distance ceased to advance. His fuel gauge dropped normally, his engine consumed diesel, but he covered no actual ground. Eventually, his truck ran out of fuel and rolled to a stop. Thomas sat in his cab trying to think of options. But every possibility seemed hopeless. He was trapped on a highway that collected drivers, that preserved them and their trucks in perpetual exhibition, that refused to release them for reasons unknown and probably unknowable. A knock on his window made Thomas jump. A man in 1950s-era clothing stood there, his face lined with age, but his body somehow preserved, not deteriorating despite standing on a highway